The only way Germany could have won World War II? I'm really interested here because a lot of people have some very strong opinions about this. This is from Alternative History Hub. I too have my own opinions about this subject. However, whenever this topic does come up, I do think of this old video by Potential History, and his claim was that Germany could never win World War II. Like it just wasn't going to be possible. I can literally hear the heads explode from the average Hearts of Iron 4 player right now. They refuse to believe that Germany had no chance of winning World War II. I'll get into my own opinions as we get later into this video though. There's the Hearts of Iron 4 reference.
Germany wins the Battle of Britain, or Stalingrad, or magically gets its hands on nukes before the Allies do, winning World War II. Right.
There's been literally countless theories about this for like 80 years now. I feel like this topic has been approached by pretty much every angle imaginable.
Truth is, despite being the most popular topic that most people associate alternate history with, there is hardly a single one of these scenarios which is based in reality. I'm talking about a reasonable timeline.
That's the
one
thing.
That doesn't massively alter major decisions.
I'm really curious in what direction he's gonna go here, because in my own timeline in my head I've got a couple of possibilities.
Bring in the alien space bats.
Oh
what
yeah,
if there was a scenario
Deus
where the
Machina
push
sort of thing.
one small domino cascades into a German victory? Well, Jimmy, after digging through countless archives, I think I have an idea.
If anyone's gonna be able to do this, it would be Alternative History Hub to figure out the most perfect theory.
So, a quick recap. After years of preparation
and
careful annexation under the Allies' policy of appeasement, Mustache Man, that's what we're calling him for this video, is ready to take things further. Germany rolls over Poland in...
Okay, so they've already done the Anschluss, they've already taken the Sudetenlands, the appeasement from the British has been happening.
September 1939, with the Soviets joining in for a good old partition. That November, the Soviets invaded Finland. In the winter, and the following April, Germany rolls through Denmark and Norway.
In 6 hours for Denmark.
The unimaginable happened. Well, it's pretty imaginable now because we know what happened. On May 10th, 1940, Germany launched a blitzkrieg attacking the Netherlands, Belgium,
around
and
the Maginot.
France.
So I'm assuming we're going to start talking about the point where Germany had the greatest advantage, when it was just Germany when they had all of Europe and before they declared war on the Soviets, and Britain stood alone.
Fire might. The same day Winston Churchill took office. What took Germany years to take back in World War I was accomplished in 2 weeks. Despite fierce resistance, the Maginot Line, and the nearly 400,000 strong British expeditionary force, Paris fell in 35 days. This outcome was shocking, not only to the...
Like seriously, put yourself in the shoes of a person that was living around that time. You'd only experienced the Great War, World War I, and the front lines between Germany and France barely moved for like 4 years. Then all of a sudden, Germany just walks into Paris in 30 days for the start of World War II.
Allies, but the German...
I mean, it wasn't technically the French and the Germans were at war for more than 30 days, but after they decided to go around the Maginot.
Well, in fact, Rommel disobeyed direct orders and used his panzers to cut off a huge portion of troops, pressing them against the English Channel. This rapid advance threatened to overextend the German line.
So basically, if Dunkirk wasn't successful,
to keep up with their tanks, many of which were starting to run out of fuel.
I mean, I do agree, because the Germans had such a massive advantage early on, the Allies didn't understand the way war worked in the 1930s and 40s. At the very beginning, they were still going off of like an old World War I strategy, not keeping up with all the new tech.
This is when an order was given, an order to halt the advance against the port city of Dunkirk on May 24th, to the astonishment of the ground generals who wanted to press their advantage. I think you can...
The only thing about this, I think we're going to definitely go into more detail, but even if the Germans just like destroyed everyone at Dunkirk, like the British still have their navy though.
You can see where I'm going with this. Nearly 500,000 Allied personnel were trapped in this tight
but I'm sure there's going to be more
awaiting evacuation.
More to this
Mustache Man decided to bomb them like fish in a barrel, using the Luftwaffe, which had complete air superiority, fearing an Allied counterattack. 2 days later, the decision was reversed. But this delay, plus a change of command, gave precious time for the miracle of Dunkirk to happen. The waters around Dunkirk were too shallow, so hundreds of civilian boats and a few destroyers were deployed. And in the course of 9 days, the brave last-stand resistance from the French and Belgian forces allowed for 338,000...
This make me really want to watch the Christopher Nolan film Dunkirk. I wish he would have done like an alternative history film now.
Troops
Nobody makes those.
To be rescued back to Britain. You've probably heard that story
There it is.
before. But what
Man, we're
rarely
thinking
gets
the same.
mentioned here is the weather. You see, out of those 9 days, just 2 had optimal flying conditions, which resulted in staggering
Classic
losses for the
Europe.
Allies, including the loss of 9 warships.
Wow.
But what do I mean by bad weather conditions?
Dunkirk disaster.
Right. So, back to the beaches of Dunkirk, where hundreds of thousands of men await their fate. The thing is, the idea of holding back, preventing a counterattack, and picking out both men and precious ships from the Royal Navy isn't a bad one. So I wouldn't really change that controversial order, which was withdrawn anyway 2 days later. What I would change, however, is the weather. Britain held a lot of their fighter planes back, afraid of a direct attack from the German Air Force, meaning that all those evacuation vessels would become easy pickings for the Luftwaffe. Panic ensues, and fearing that there's no way out, a huge portion of the expeditionary force simply...
That's a pretty easy change. Something that no one can affect the weather. Well, other people have different opinions about nowadays, but
takes up
back
arms, joins the French, and fights back. What we see is bogged down urban warfare, where thousands die on both sides. But ultimately, the pocket is squeezed in. As in our timeline, the Belgian King Leopold issues his unconditional surrender on May 28th, and within a week, almost everyone at Dunkirk is either dead or captured.
So
sure,
that's 500,000 men, more or less, something like that. I wonder if this is going to be more of a morale blow, because I talked about how, you know, like the British still have their navy. I would think they'd still be able to protect their shores with just their boats. This probably would have hurt the British so much that they might have pieced out with the Germans in 1940, meaning they just controlled Europe themselves. Let's see.
Some would be evacuated and live to fight another day. But consider this.
Some, of course.
On the first day of the evacuation, with very limited pressure from the Germans, only 7,600 soldiers were ferried across the channel. At best, I'd say no more than 40,000 are rescued. In our timeline, Britain had just over 40,000 soldiers captured in the entire Battle of France.
Wow.
But after this alternate Dunkirk disaster, that number skyrockets to 240,000.
Wow.
More than half of the troops that left the Isles. And we're not just talking about any regular troops here. These were regulars. Huge difference.
Yeah, that's a good... Yeah, these weren't the new guys.
Could have come home.
These weren't like the 13-year-old boys out there. Not that the British were doing that. I mean, they probably were sneaking in, but that's more of a German thing to throw the kids on the front lines at the very end.
And drilled thousands more, which would eventually be useful to fight the Germans and Italians in Africa, Sicily, eventually Normandy. Instead, in this alternate timeline, these guys are now POWs. A massive stain on Churchill's record. Additionally, with clear skies, even more British warships would find their way to the bottom of the channel.
Because remember, at this time, again to repeat, the Germans were not at war with the Soviets yet, and they weren't at war with the US yet. It was even before this point, because again, this is 1941, the Germans were attacking the Soviets, but the UK would be over here without some of their best soldiers if Dunkirk was not as successful as it was. Saying Dunkirk was a success is weird because it was like, you know, like a retreat, but you know what I mean.
Not enough to make Operation Sea Lion a reality or anything, but enough to add to the horror the British public was already experiencing.
Oh man, I think we're on the exact same wavelength. Okay, so far, I think I know exactly where this video is going to go.
France signs its unconditional surrender. This means that the lowlands join Denmark and Norway in its occupation. France is replaced with Vichy France.
Because already in our timeline, the British, when they were alone, were considering just white peace. Just get out, day was done. But I didn't consider this just like a massive L if they took in Dunkirk. That probably would have pushed the tides to just get out of the war.
Poland is partitioned. Central Europe is under Mustache Man's thumb. Spain is ruled by Franco. Italy by Mussolini. And the Swiss are just chilling. Britain stands alone. And a furious and embarrassed Winston Churchill,
they oust him, maybe?
He could say, I told you so. Here's the deafening cries of fathers, mothers, and brothers who scream, "Bring our boys home."
Britain sues for peace.
When we look at military conflicts, what we usually look for
This is it. This is crazy. Like, it wasn't even that long ago I talked in my Drew IRL channel. I made a brief mention about how that is the point where the Germans became the closest in winning. Quote unquote winning. This is the ideal scenario for them, because when they declared war on the Soviets, they just doomed themselves. They should have learned from France and Napoleon before them, even the great Swedish Empire before that. Don't declare war on Russia, or I guess I should say don't invade Russia. Because remember, Poland won their independence by fighting a war against the Soviet Union. That was very different. They weren't charging after Moscow. It was just more of a defensive war for them. Even though at times they were looking like they were pushing in.
Direct casualties as a result of the battle, often ignoring deaths caused by illnesses, which surpassed them in every major conflict. Unless it was the Russo-Japanese War. But what also gets equally
another
neglected
amazing war I love to
are
talk
the
about.
captives. The reality is that captives, especially high-ranking ones, play a huge role, including in World War II. Deaths can be martyred, but knowing a huge portion of men are still overseas, awaiting an uncertain fate,
might not want to bomb the crap out of
political pressure. In our timeline,
out of the Germans in that
isolated Britain
situation.
had only one reason to continue the fight: survival. But what if there was an alternative? What if peace could be made, and also allow for 250,000 Britons to come back
okay.
home?
I like the setup here. Losing Dunkirk, bunch of POWs. This is that little bit of back information that is crucial, that's different from just like the UK pieces out for whatever reason.
The miracle of Dunkirk was a huge morale booster, but here, it breaks the slim majority in the British war cabinet. In late May, as France was going down, it spent 2 days in session, during which Lord Halifax made a proposal to, quote, explore German terms of peace.
Yep.
The session was made up of 5 members, 2 of which, Halifax and Chamberlain,
of course,
voted for, while Churchill, Attlee, and Greenwood voted against. How hard would it be to imagine that Britain would choose
That's
to
all you
seek
need.
out
You just
peace
would need
terms?
one of those guys to
I think
flip.
in these conditions, that would be very likely, with or without Churchill.
Maybe
So
he'd be
in
the only
early
one.
July 1940, through an intermediary, probably Spain, high-ranking members from both sides could meet
Spain,
in a
very
conference to
neutral.
discuss terms.
I mean, they were neutral, but you know, with the whole fascist Franco in charge, yeah.
Mustache Man's promises
Probably don't have
to
anyone
the
else.
German people were kept to the letter, and he seemed unstoppable. But considering everything
Now,
we know
what's going to
about
be interesting about this theory might still go down the route of Germany only survives for a little bit longer. I could definitely see that happening. Maybe there's still a stance taken here that the Germans eventually fall. Somehow the Germans still end up being forced to go to war with the Soviets. They say they needed that oil, but would they need that oil if they were no longer at war with the UK and, of course, eventually the US? It'd be kind of funny to argue that they would still collapse by 1945, even though they would have been at peace for like 5 years or something like that. We're still only halfway through this video. There's still a lot to be discussed.
him at this stage of his life, he would have probably given Britain soft terms of peace. Nothing like the unconditional surrenders of the lowlands in France. We would probably see war reparations being imposed. Malta and Gibraltar given to Italy and Spain respectively.
Oh, so it's not even a white piece.
Special rights over trade could be demanded, especially concerning the Suez.
If they were getting back all of their prisoners of war, I mean, yeah, the UK would have to give stuff up. These are some big things they'd be losing, though.
Formal recognition of the Reich's newly gained territories.
Ooh.
Finally, a policy of isolationism could be forced upon the British, banning them from aiding
You know,
any
it's funny,
resistance
like,
group.
imagine like the same situation that occurred in Germany after World War I happens in the UK in this situation. They get pissed for being blamed, for being punished so hard, then the British go fascist, and there's just like 2 fascist dictators fighting in Europe.
Or
Oswald
meddling in
Mosley.
the affairs of Europe even further.
Obviously, that's not going to happen,
Something
but
which
it's
would
just kind
have
of
dire
so many funny
consequences
alternative
for
history
Greece
theories.
and Yugoslavia. So, sorry guys. In return, the British could gain a non-aggression treaty with Germany for, say, like 5 years, and have all their captured soldiers brought back unharmed. Within like 2 months, the entire Western Front is secure, and now Germany could rest easy, or at least focus its entire strength on that Russian bear.
Interesting. Now,
Before
where do we go
turn
from
east,
here? German
it's important
1941.
to look back at the exact timeline of events here. In our world, British defiance is followed up with the Battle of Britain, which more or less cripples the Luftwaffe.
Yeah.
Between mid-July and late October of 1940, it lost 2,000 aircraft trying to soften up the ground targets and beat out.
Whenever people say that the British don't deserve much credit for World War II, this is what they're forgetting. The Battle of Britain was a really big deal.
The Royal Air Force.
Unfortunately, people make that argument a lot.
But since the battle was fought over British soil, any German pilot who parachuted out of their aircraft would find themselves in hostile territory, on an island. The Allied pilots, on the other hand, could easily be given a bandage, respawn, and join a new match.
Bam, love getting
Ultimately,
respawned.
the loss of its best pilots was deeply felt, and this was a blow from which the German Air Force never really recovered. In the meantime, Italy also wanted a piece of the action after their failed attempt at aiding Germany against France. So they picked someone their own size, alone, to prove their military prowess. You can imagine how that went.
But in this situation, what does the Italians... See, that's the interesting thing. What do the Italians do in this situation? They don't have to worry about the British anymore. I mean, they probably would still... Remember, they wanted to become a new Rome. They wanted to reform that old Roman Empire, but yeah.
The Reich stepped in and snowballed through Yugoslavia and Greece between April and June of 1941. Many argue that this side quest delayed the surprise invasion of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
But not really. You see, in order to conduct their operations, the Germans needed to wait for the ground to harden. So at most, they lost like a single month. That being said, the wear and tear on their vehicles and aircraft, the fatigue of their soldiers, and the expenditure of resources did take a toll on the army. Finally, when Germany did invade the Soviets in late June, not during the winter like many believe, it was
Yeah, no, it was not during the winter, but it ended up lasting several winters. That was the problem. And it's actually really funny. I've talked about this so many times on my channel. You actually kind of want to invade the Soviets in the winter, like late winter, because then it's, you know, the ice is beginning to thaw, the weather's starting to get better, then you have like a full 9 months to just blast on through. Invading during the winter is the best part.
Massive success. Within 1 month, Brest-Litovsk, Minsk, Riga, Lviv, and Smolensk fell. But by the time winter did come, the German advance slowed down. In large part,
and they were deep in Soviet territory, which made it even worse, even colder.
Due to the confusing decision to move armored units around, first away from Army Group Center, and then later back to it. More than anything, it was the delay and wear and tear of this maneuver that cost the Germans Leningrad and other strategic targets. And then by October, good old Uncle Sam in Britain began sending numerous shipments of supplies and equipment,
the Soviets,
prolonging the fight. The rest is history. But after a disastrous Dunkirk and pieced out Britain, yeah, the timeline's history is kind of different.
Barbarossa on steroids.
In the short term, the last stand at Dunkirk means that Germany sustained some extra casualties and obtained slightly less military.
So in this world, if the Germans do still attack the Soviets and they're not at war with the British, going to assume the US still help the Soviets is a funny idea, but I don't know, would the British not be able to because of the peace agreement? I mean, in this scenario, maybe there are American troops literally fighting on the Soviet front because they wouldn't be able to fight on the British Isles anymore, obviously.
But that
they'd
also
be stationed
means no
there, but
Battle of Britain, aka the Luftwaffe,
yeah,
doesn't get nerfed. Additionally, with Britain pledging to not interfere in the continent, Greece and Yugoslavia don't get the valuable aid they received in our timeline. Now, does that mean that Italy would succeed? Obviously not. But it does mean that the invasion of the Balkans starts sooner and ends much quicker. Actually, it's even possible for them, especially Yugoslavia, to go the, we're kinda with the Axis but not really route that Bulgaria took.
And there was a lot of places that did that in World War II. Look at Thailand. It's like, whatever, we'll just join Japan to avoid getting invaded. Wasn't that crazy back then?
Germany has only one front to worry about, and engages the Soviet Union in early June of 1941. A completely unprepared communist front line collapses, as the Wehrmacht speedruns through the Eastern Front. For just a moment, I want to highlight
I'm sure they're
what
protecting,
is now called,
back at France, but they don't need to keep as many troops back over there. They could send way more divisions out towards Russia.
The German-Soviet Air War
without the British obviously being a threat.
1941, the largest
Because remember
battle.
that the Mustache Man was paranoid of an Allied invasion crossing the English Channel. I'm not sure if they were that paranoid back in 1941, but by the end of the war, I mean, they'd built so many bunkers. Let me just find the map. They knew something was coming by 1943, especially when they started losing in the Eastern Front against the Soviets. So they were very paranoid back in France because this was their occupied territory at that time.
Military history. On one side, you have just over 10,000 Soviet aircraft.
Ooh.
On the other, 3,300 German. Now, if you didn't know, Germany won. But try to guess how many aircraft were lost by the Luftwaffe. Don't worry, I'll wait. Whatever you guessed, you're probably wrong.
7.
Because the real answer is 55.
Hey, I was pretty
55
close.
aircraft to the Soviets' 4,000. The preemptive strikes on Soviet airfields, more effective radio systems, superior aircraft, and pilot experience all led to one outcome: total German dominance. Messerschmitts and Junkers patrolled the air and rained fire from
the whole, like, just build a crap ton of T-34s doesn't work in the air. The Soviets had just a bunch of tanks, and that was their strategy. There wasn't a great tank, but a bunch of them.
above. The Wehrmacht knew exactly where the enemy was, while the Soviets scrambled from one defense line to the next. All of this happened in our timeline, even with the heavy losses at the Battle of Britain. Now imagine what an even stronger Air Force could do. To state the obvious right away, do you really think the siege of Leningrad would have lasted over 2 years under these conditions?
Yeah.
The mobility of
I thought it would last for even longer. I guess it was 2 years.
Allows for an even more deadly blitzkrieg. Before the well-known failure at Stalingrad, many couch tacticians are quick to point out the missed opportunities at Leningrad and Moscow, both of which were within Mustache Man's grasp. The extra month,
Very close.
extra munitions, extra aircraft and pilots, and improved organization.
Also, maybe
might not be
winter
enough
clothes.
to take out both by the end of 41.
I don't know why they would
but
have
at
that
least
by
one of them is surely going down.
Germany dominates Europe.
The next big thing on the agenda is Lend-Lease. Does Roosevelt really just sit back and observe as Germany takes over continental Europe?
It'd be very interesting because we're looking at a world where the U.S. is like possibly directly allied with just the Soviets. Obviously, they were allied with the Soviets, but it was like the Soviet, you know, the Allies. It was the USA, the UK, and the USSR. Imagine a world where it's just the USA and the Soviets. That's it. They become best friends. Just funny to think about because of our timeline, the Cold War, things like that.
Well, yeah. No, seriously. What could America really do? Britain was the crucial connection to the continent, and even if they did choose to break the treaty with Germany, the aid sent through the Persian Gulf, Arctic, and Pacific would be little too late. History
So this is claiming
all
that
about
the U.S.
timing,
is just not going to help the
if
Soviets.
One of the three army groups achieved its main goal, that being Leningrad, Moscow,
I mean, maybe they would want to, but the claim here is that they wouldn't be able to do anything.
or Stalingrad. The fall of the other two would become a lot easier. Hypothetically, let's say Leningrad falls first. That's almost an extra 1,000,000 troops.
Jeez.
And a ton of hardware now making its way for Moscow. Once Moscow falls, it's off to Stalingrad and the oil fields.
would the
of
US really have-
Caucasus. Oh, don't
would it be
worry.
fast?
I didn't forget about those oil fields.
There it is,
There is no
the oil
timeline
fields.
in which Germany could sustain a prolonged war on multiple fronts, with dangers looming from Britain, Africa, and the East. But in this one hypothetical, the full might of the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe simply breaks down Stalin within 18 months. As crazy as that sounds, America can supply rebel
Well, I mean,
groups
that's what that was
year-round.
their theory. The mustache man said that the Soviets were just a wooden shack. It just needed to be busted down. What, a door or something? We have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will be coming down. Okay, there you go. I'm crashing down, my bad. Oh boy, Douglas MacArthur.
And it won't make much of a difference, even with the broken Enigma code at the end of 42. I know it sounds crazy. Not to mention that Japan still hits Pearl Harbor, leading to a very bleak reality. By mid-1943, the Axis powers dominate the old world, and in their triumph, take a year of respite to lick their wounds, which despite
Remember
the
that, you know, they say that classic phrase, American steel, British intelligence, and Soviet blood. That's what won World War II. The Soviet blood wouldn't be there. All three of those elements, very crucial for the Allies to win World War II. They would not have a key factor, so just British intelligence and just American steel. You still needed somebody to be able to sacrifice all those bodies. And that was the Soviet Union in our timeline. They would be gone by then, before the Americans and the UK would be able to do anything.
are
So
going
that's
to
the
be
scary
severe.
aspect.
Puppet states need to be propped up, resources are exploited, manpower forcefully conscripted, and Germany takes on a new super project. One not simply aimed at restoring its manpower, tanks, and aircraft to full capacity. Oh no, we're talking about building a Kriegsmarine worthy of taking on the Royal Navy.
That's what they'd, of
Goliath
course, that's what they'd
battleships
want.
that would make the Bismarck seem like a ferry boat and an armada of U-boats.
Because that's the big thing that stopped them. That's why they couldn't get to the British Isles. They didn't have the Navy.
Position. Not the perfect position, but a better one.
Operation Sea Lion. So this is when the Germans...
Bismarck took about 27
The Germans plan to do a reverse D-Day on the UK.
months to build. A feasible timeline in which the entire might of the Reich is focused on toppling the final thorn in its side. Non-aggression treaties be
with
damned.
the US?
Let's say in May 1945, the air raid sirens blare from Plymouth to Norwich, and the Spitfires take to the skies. Intercepted
so this is obviously going to end where the Germans do end up taking the British Isles.
Most of the bombing raids at a great cost. But then comes the battle at sea. HMS Vanguard, King George, and the Prince of Wales.
This is interesting, I mean, because you don't need to go this route. You could just be like, what if the Germans just were chilling? It's fun. It's a more fun thought process. But what if the Germans were like, it's fine. The British can stay right there. We already control all of continental Europe. And then the world becomes divided into 3 powers. The British would be pretty weakened, but remember, they still would have their empire. The US would probably want them to keep that empire, if anything.
Off against the newest class of super ships in an epic standoff. Germany gives itself a few months to break down as much of the enemy morale, ships, and aircraft as possible, while amassing a 1 million force, mostly made up of Eastern Front veterans. The best of the best, ready to launch a reverse Normandy, which would...
Reverse Normandy. Man.
6th of August, 1945.
So many lines in this video. We've been on the same exact thought process.
And unsuspecting Berlin is obliterated by Little Boy. A few days later, Hamburg, the most important coastal city and major shipyard for the Kriegsmarine, follows suit. The American giant is awake. And while Turing was decrypting Enigma codes in Bletchley Park, Oppenheimer was ushering in the atomic age in Los Alamos. The nuking of Germany was the original goal of the Manhattan Project. It was only sidelined after the rapid success of Stalingrad and Normandy. In our timeline, the atomic bombings were little more than a cherry on top. However, here, in a timeline where Germany actually succeeds, the nukes are a game changer. An Allied D-Day type campaign would be impossible with a pacified Russia.
That's what I was
The atomic bombs would basically be an ace in the hole designed to solve a problem exactly such as this.
So just
and that's
stopping
a hand
the
that could only be played twice, at least in the short term. Germany was always the main target here. What happens next?
I thought it was 3. I'm pretty sure they had 3 bombs. The 3rd bomb was never dropped on Japan. Because isn't that the one that ended up becoming the Demon Core? I love the story of the Demon Core. I thought I remember reading it would have taken at least 6 months to have built any more after that. So basically the British are saved because the Americans nuke Germany and Germany bounces out of the war.
How does Germany react? Does the bombing take out Mustache Man?
Oh, himself?
Bombings prompt large-scale rebellions in Europe? Who knows? The thing about alternate history is that this is just fiction at the end of the day. Despite the clickbaity title, I don't have a magic 8-ball. I've done research, sure, but this is really just one take. That's the beauty of alternate history. With every hypothetical answer, there are numerous hypothetical questions and rabbit holes.
It's a fun thought process because remember that there's still debate to this day if it was the bombs themselves that made Japan surrender or if it was the Soviet invasion in Manchuria or a combination of both. I wonder if the Germans just like don't even blink to getting nuked 3 times and they just continue forward. I mean, yeah, 3 cities just got destroyed, but whatever, they're gonna invade the British still. It's interesting.
To follow. So feel free to call me out on what I missed or got wrong.
I liked it. It was a fun situation at the end. I liked building the storyline. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I didn't want to start off this video claiming how I think the Germans could have won World War II, but we both had the same exact point that July 1940 when the British in our timeline were considering just piecing out. But what I think is so interesting about this perspective is to see them take a huge L in Dunkirk. Obviously a bunch of British POWs, like that's the extra element you do need, I think, to make that like a possibility for World War II to have gone the other way, basically. So we're fine, as long as no one attacks the United States. Question, what's your question, Tojo? Oh god, Japan. Just don't do that, don't attack the US. Does Roosevelt just sit back and watch Germany take over continental Europe? Well, he certainly wasn't gonna be standing. FDR wheelchair jokes. Wait, what the heck? What, Google? Oh snap, that's... Alright, I love how there's no alternative history where Italy has a competent military. That's just gonna be a little bit too far-fetched. Sometimes I still like to subscribe to the idea that even if the Germans were just sitting on continental Europe and they basically controlled the entire continent, by the 1960s when Hitler was getting really old, there'd be like protests rising up, people, trying to fight back. I mean, a lot of fascist regimes face insane unrest at one point or another. I don't know if we'd be ready just how bad the Germans would be though. Really awesome video, Alternative History Hub. Big thanks to the patrons. Month 1 in Drew's basement. was mentioned. I can't sleep without Drew's voice. Drew's Argentinian Grandpa. I'm back. Amateur Archaeology. aPhatNarwhal. Carmel Saida. DaBeautiful-MEGAN-Underwood. InquisitorXarius. KirinoIsBestGirl. Tyrol. The Mexican KingBearHaze. Fredrik Tibblin. And ZaneyBoi.